I've worked in financial services for 25 years, and I'm very aware, particularly in recent years when I've started mixing with people who are interested in sustainability and environmentalism and things like that, that we perhaps have quite a bad reputation. You can imagine that everybody going boo hiss when the financial advisor walks onto the pantomime stage. But what I wanted to say is, historically, I understand why financial services has had a bad reputation. There's been a lot of mis-selling scandals. You know, some members of the industry in the past have behaved in not the best of ways. And then it's just kind of a reputation of being quite elitist, for the wealthy, for a particular sector of society, not very diverse. And you know, you keep hearing about scandals and things like that, pension mis-selling, and more recently the defined benefit transfers. You know, it continues to go on. Like any industry, there are some bad apples, but that doesn't mean that it's just bad through and through, and it's past redemption, should I say. When it comes to the way that we behave, I think the industry traditionally has been a little bit kind of slow to change, and kind of like rested on its laurels a little bit. You know, a lot of people who work in financial services tend to be in quite secure jobs and paid relatively well. So why would they be the ones who are kind of championing change and trying to bring in an innovation because, you know, they're in a comfortable position? And I think as well, some sectors of the finance industry are still a little bit behind the curve in understanding the huge challenges, risks and opportunities that lie ahead with climate change and the transition we need to make. But there is myself and plenty of others who are trying to make that more clearer to people, and to encourage them to act on it. But it comes to discipline in the industry. We are an extremely highly regulated industry, and that can be you know, an important safety net, and it does mean that the industry improves. It can, however, also make it a little bit kind of another reason why it's quite cautious and slow to change. Some of the changes that the regulators have made to the industry over the years that have been very positive have been encouraging us to be more open about the fees we charge. There is now a minimum level of professional qualifications that you have to have if you want to be a financial advisor, and they are degree level qualifications, you know, like getting a chartered accountant's qualification, things like that. So, you know, some of that does kind of sort out some of the wheat from the chaff. Also, more regulations were brought in after the financial crisis in 2008 to kind of make managers of companies more responsible for things if they go wrong. So there's a lot of individual accountability in the industry now too. But when it comes to discipline, one point I wanted to make is that sometimes the people who should be kind of keeping discipline and keeping control don't necessarily always do the best thing either, because sometimes financial services reacts to legislation that governments have brought in. So, for example, back in 2014, when the government decided to launch pension freedoms and that everybody have flexibility and control of their pensions, it has been a bit of a free-for-all, and the financial advice industry has had to deal with that. So it's not just always from the financial advice industry on a standalone basis, it's the framework in which it sits. And are we ready for change? Can we get better? I certainly see signs now more than ever. I think I've never been more engaged with the financial services industry as I am at the moment, because there is a lot of change afoot. There's a lot of move towards encouraging more young people to come into the industry, and that's a need as much as anything, because a lot of people, the financial advisors typically are, you know, in their 50s and 60s, they want to retire at some point, they need to pass their clients on to somebody else. So you see a movement for young people to be coming in and being trained. That brings more diversity, new fresh thinking. More people are more highly qualified now than they used to be. And generally, I think there's a rising level of standards, so people have to kind of increase how they're performing to keep up with everybody else, which is a good thing. Also, it's well known that at the moment, you know, the wealthiest individuals that the financial services industry tends to want to deal with are older people, but they are going to soon be passing their wealth on. You know, the baby boomers will be passing money on to the younger generations. And I think the industry is aware that once that happens, things will have to start changing a little bit. If we can go on to the next slide, please, slide 3. So these are some of the organisations I wanted to highlight as I see as kind of having a really good impact in the industry. If you look at the top 2 there, the UNPRI Principles for Responsible Investment, they're really kind of helping make sure that the investment industry is a responsible owner of businesses and a responsible steward of capital. So there's a series of principles that people have to sign up to. And that was launched in 2006 with 100 signatories, and it now has 4,000. So it's really coming on fast that people understand that investing responsibly and thinking about social and environmental issues and how well a company is run and how well it treats its staff and its customers is an increasingly important thing to do. Not just because you know, that's the right thing to do morally, but also because companies that do those kind of things do over the long term tend to make more profit, and that's becoming better understood all the time. Moving on to pensions, the pension industry has been regulated. It's a little bit ahead of the game than the investment industry. I would say there's been a lot of regulations coming from the pension regulator and the government to say that pension scheme trustees have to start thinking a bit more carefully about how they run their members' investments, because they have a fiduciary duty to provide for people's retirement. That's a really important responsibility, and it's become more and more apparent that you have to take into account things like climate change risks and stuff like that to make sure that people's money is going to still, you know, kind of fit with the long-term economy ahead when they retire as well. It's not just about kind of short-term profits. You have to take a long-term view as to how the world is changing. The consumer campaigns have really come to the fore recently. So I don't know, some people may be already aware of it already, but the Make My Money Matter campaign launched by Richard Curtis, the film director, probably about a year ago, 18 months ago now. And that's really trying to engage the public and the pension industry with the realization that everybody's pensions are invested in certain things, and they might be things that are good, or they might be things that you really don't want to be invested in. So spreading awareness of that and trying to tell people how they can actually engage to move their money or encourage their employers to help them if they're not happy with where their pension is invested. You have some others on there. I've mentioned Good with Money. That's in the toolkit. That's a really good site to go to if you want to do your own research on, you know, which banks and funds and things are good to invest in. It's far too big a subject for today. But what I wanted to also mention as well is that young people are having a very disruptive influence in a good way. So, for example, Chimello that I've listed there, that's a company that's a fintech company that's been started up by a group of university students who campaigned about their university pension fund and have now set up an app that basically allows pension investors to know exactly which companies they hold in their pension funds, and then it tells all the people in the pension scheme what those companies are doing, what they're voting on, what decisions they're making, and allows the pension holder to actually have a view and influence the decisions, which is, you know, it's all about empowerment and engagement. That's a really valuable thing. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of change, and it's what we want is more of it and for it to spread more across the mainstream. So next slide, please. Yeah, this was me. I just wanted to highlight this one company, Tribe. I don't have any connection with them. It was a perfect example of a company that is really kind of disrupting and innovating. And Amy Clark, she's a CEO. She speaks at a lot of events. She's really kind of like trying to change things. And I think as you have somebody like that pushing at the boundaries and doing the really innovative stuff, then the rest of the market kind of moves along behind them. And then you see everybody kind of move in a different direction. So that's positive. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if we're looking at this as a school report, I've come up with an overall grade of C+ at the moment, which might not sound great, but it's what I think is that C+, but improving all the time. So, you know, what I would hope is that maybe, you know, by this time next year, we'd be doing a whole lot better. So there's a huge amount of improvement and good work being done, but it isn't widespread enough. I think we need more support from the government. I think really for financial services to have a big impact, it needs to be able to kind of push itself a bit more away from the mainstream and invest in new ideas and new technologies and smaller companies as well as big companies. And some of these things are very risky, and so it needs some government support to do that, because you know, the money that it's working with are people's pensions, they are people's futures, and you can't take too much risk with them. So yeah, that there needs to be some new systems and mechanisms in place, I think, there. Mixing with more people, I think the financial services industry needs to consider the fact that it does have to change. It does have to be more accessible to a more diverse range of people and younger people, and perhaps change some of its models and practices gradually to address that. We need to improve our communication. We're absolutely terrible within the industry for jargon. I apologise if I've included any of this, any of it accidentally so far in my presentation. But yeah, far too many acronyms and abbreviations and strange words for things that we don't need to use, and we need to stop doing that to make ourselves more accessible. And I think we just need to sometimes go for, you know, avoid the easy option and try to go for the slightly, you know, more a route that's a little bit more difficult for us. I mean, I looked at a few stats earlier, and at the moment there's about 8% of funds are invested sustainably, and that figure is increasing massively. You know, you see figures all the time, record levels of money moving into sustainable funds, but it is still only a small proportion. There was another figure came out today that on average only 20% of the companies that investment funds invest in, they only actually engage with 20% of those companies. So they will actually only write to, you know, 1 in 5 of the companies they invest in to express their views on climate change or social matters or whatever the issue of the day might be. And yet they're all kind of pertaining to be, you know, the people who are changing all these big companies' behaviors and things like that. But we want to see more of that. And it takes a lot of time, but what I think we have to do is present that as a benefit of investment. People don't realize that all these things are going on behind the scenes, and that your money does have the potential to make change, and we need to communicate that better. And then, yeah, the final point there, we just need to move faster. We need to do more work, more of the positive stuff. There's still lots of potential for more people to do more things, yeah, the key there is that we need to have confidence. I think that it's what the consumer wants as well. So there is a part for the consumer to play, to let the financial services industry know that actually they do want more sustainable investments. They do want their money to do some good. Yes, they have to grow their money, they have to look after their finances, but it's maybe not their priority to have the absolute maximum return at all costs, regardless of the damage it does. And that, you know, there's still some communication needing to be done in that space. Can I have the next slide, please? So I just wanted to highlight this statistic. This is about banking. You know, I'm work in financial services and investments and pensions more, but I thought it was very interesting to see how much kind of if you know, not everybody's against fossil fuels, but if you do think that fossil fuels need to go, then obviously we've still got a long way to go if we're going to yeah, really kind of stop the trend of that industry being the way forward. A statistic came out today, it was in the FTSE that I'm just going to check, I get the figure out, I think it was 11 million every minute, that's it. So 11 million pounds every minute goes to subsidise the fossil fuel industry. People are worried about not turning that off, because then energy prices will go up, and my goodness, we're all scared about the prices going up at the moment as it is. But yeah, if that money wasn't spent there, then I'm sure it could be spent in other ways as well. So next slide, please. So Dorothea had said she thought it would be good if I said something tonight about what the individual investor can do. So I've kind of wanted to cover a few tips here. So the first thing I want to say is by attending this event tonight, you've already started on your journey. Education is key. The Global Ethical Finance Institute, which is a great Scottish organisation with a lot of really good members doing good things, lots of materials, educational materials on their website. They did a survey, and 78% of Scots don't think that they are investors, but 78% of Scots have a pension fund which is invested. So it just goes to show that most people don't really even understand exactly what's happening with their money behind the scenes. And only 15% of Scottish people actively choose their investments. The rest really just don't know where their money is going at all, or perhaps even aware how, or that they can actually direct that in a certain way. So I've covered again some more stuff in the toolkit that might help if people want to figure out some more information about that. I would say, you know, move your money. Once you've educated yourself and you found out where it isn't that difficult to move it. There are lots of different options, whether it's transferring your bank account, transferring your pension, moving your investments somewhere else. You know, there's lots of companies out there who will be more than happy to help you find something better. Express your views. Conversations, I think, are hugely important if we're going to tackle climate change and some of the other global issues that we face at the moment. The more people that talk about it, the better. So whether you're, you know, if you're a young person who's thinking, well, what can I do? I don't have much money. Have the conversation with your parents or your grandparents and let them know that you care about these things. Maybe at some point they're planning on passing a bit of money on to you in the future, and they might want to kind of understand how you would like that invested in the meantime. Ask questions. If you are in a situation where you're with a financial product provider, an advisor, or interacting with the industry in any way, don't take anything at face value. Ask lots of questions about how your money is going to be invested, why they've chosen those companies, and all those different things. I recently, well, last year sometime, was looking at a fund and wondering whether to put some money in it, and saw that it held Nestle. And this is just a purely personal opinion, but Nestle isn't my favorite company. So I wrote to the fund manager to ask where they were holding that company. I wasn't particularly impressed with their reply. So I wrote to every other fund manager I could think of and asked them, would they hold that company? And sometimes you just, you know, if you've got a niggle in your head, you just need to do what you need to do to solve it. And I didn't invest in the fund in the end. So influence others. Whether it's, again, as I said, your parents, whether it's your colleagues. Sometimes working together in a group is much more effective than working alone. So if you want to do something about your pension scheme, do it with a group of your colleagues and all kind of put a little bit of influence on your employer together and ask them if they can make a change. And join the consumer campaigns, the campaigns I've mentioned already, such as Make My Money Matter, groups like Share Action, who are trying to empower investors. None of them can have any power unless people actually sign their petitions, join their groups, and interact with them. And the final point here, there's a big debate raging in financial services at the moment about whether you should invest, divest or engage in companies. So should you just absolutely refuse to invest in a fossil fuel company if you're concerned about climate change, or should you invest in it and try and make change? There was an interesting headline came out today that a lot of sustainable funds are selling off shares in fossil fuel companies at the moment, but all the hedge funds, you know, the real kind of short-term profit makers, are going around and buying up the shares. So selling a share doesn't necessarily have a big direct impact on that company if somebody else is going to buy it anyway. So, you know, you might have to think about whether the right way to go about something is actually to hold a company that you don't necessarily agree with, if you're sure that the person who's looking after that money for you is properly engaging with that company to try and drive change. So there's a lot of interesting issues there. I must admit my personal opinion on that one does change from time to time. But, and the next slide, please. And I just wanted to finish with 5 request, I suppose, for COP26, if you wanted to try and engage with the conference and the mobilise finance, which is one of the 4 pillars, then what practical things could anybody do to help the finance industry do better? And these are just my own personal thoughts. And firstly, I think that, you know, the government needs to have a more progressive tax and economic system. Despite being quite long in the tooth myself, I do really think that we need to support the younger generations, and we've all had it quite easy compared to how they're having it right now, and the tax system should reflect that more. I think we need to look at more investment in smaller companies and local projects, and not the big FTSE 100 companies. And again, some of that might need some incentives from the government, because it will tend to be more risky. We need more regulations. Regulations sound boring and dull and kind of red tape and all the rest of it, but actually the right regulations can really help, especially in an area like this where it's new and people struggle to understand. So I think the more kind of standards and labels and consistent processes we can have, the better. Nature, yeah, I think we have to recognise the value of nature, and I think there will be a lot of campaigning at COP26 around that, but you know, I hope that that is taken seriously as well. And finally, one of the key things I think for finance is that we don't have any sudden shocks. Financial markets do not do well with shocks, you know, whether it's the pandemic, whether it was the financial crash, whatever else it might be. If something happens very suddenly and abruptly, potentially because we've left it too late and we have to do it quickly, then the markets are going to fall and people's investments are going to fall and people's retirements will have to be delayed and all the rest of it. So we need to have a plan, and we need to kind of start working as soon as possible so that we have got time to have a plan, and we don't just have to kind of rip everything down quickly, because then the consequences could be quite disastrous.